Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Nima Rahmani. Dr. Rahmani is both a chiropractor and an educator specializing in helping individuals and professionals get to the root cause of their physical and emotional challenges, from stressed, depressed, and anxious to living powerfully aligned and on purpose. After building a successful chiropractic practice in Maple Ridge, BC, Dr. Nima sold his clinic in June 2016 to pursue his passion for teaching and coaching professionals who are stressed, depressed, and anxious to transform and have their best year ever in both a private and corporate setting. Dr. Nima, what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
I'm glad to be here. Jason, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, when I started to look over your work, I got really excited to chat with you because this series, I've had so many people asking me about immunity. Given everything that's gone on the last few months, that's been a topic on people's heads, and they're really curious of what do they do. And there's lots of great information when we talk about key nutrients and different things and how that affects the immune system. But what I'm really excited about sharing is that, like everything in health, it is this big totality, and you can't separate these little individual pieces completely. You have to kind of come back to how the whole body is functioning. And you've done a lot of work on the emotional side of things, and that's the kind of part I'm really curious about bringing to the listeners today.
You bet. You bet.
So I'd love to hear your story from the beginning. How did you go from having a busy chiropractic practice, successful for a long period of time, selling it, to basically go into edutaining, as I think you describe it?
Well, essentially, I'm just going to get a little more comfortable. I like to stand sometimes at my desk. So I'm just adjusting it. Essentially, I went into chiropractic because I prided myself on getting to the root cause of the root cause of the problem, right? And I thought that it was just the chiropractic adjustment. But then what I would notice is that patients were coming in at the end stage physical manifestations of stress-related problems. You know this. You're a naturopath, you're an osteopath. You can't avoid this. You can't be in practice as a healthcare practitioner like you and I and think that it's just the physical, right? So in my own study of personal growth, personal development, dealing with my low self-esteem issues from being a kid who was bullied, going through challenges in my divorce, in my own kind of like midlife crisis search for who I am, understanding of who I am, and setting up a powerful context in my life, I realize I'm not really getting to the root cause of the root cause. Most of the time, it's relationship breakdowns, unhealed attachment wounds that are repeated again and again and again in life, which form traumas that are repeated from earlier childhood woundings that are unresolved, because we never really were taught how to do conflict very well. And because of conflict, because of our inability to handle conflict, our inability to process when somebody is having an emotional upset in front of us, we can't help but become enmeshed in it. Because of that dynamic entanglement, we then turn around and self-abandon. We then experience stress. We then experience judgment, abandonment, blame, and shame of ourselves, much like we did when we were younger, in service of approval, in service of our survival needs, our attachment needs. We learn to put on masks and abandon who we are in service of approval. And so we just keep playing these roles out in life, and our relationships start to break down. And then soon after, because of that conflict, then we get the physical manifestation in the body. And until this one time, I finally met this client, this patient who changed my life. She came in with stress-related problems, helped her for 3 months, completely helped her with her pain. I never spoke to her about her stress. She had ticked off every box of anxiety, depression, digestion, everything, but I was just dealing with her pain, and she had a story of suffering from her past. Oh, Dr. Nima, you don't know, I've had a really rough time. And so when she died, I realized that I wasn't, after a few months of helping her, she was doing better than she was with her walking, her pain meds were off. And after that moment, I realized after she died from a heart attack, I was like, oh, it's time for me to start teaching people. The word doctor means teacher. How often was I actually teaching them the underlying root cause of the root cause of why they were there? So I started at that moment giving myself permission, overcoming that little voice in the head that says, "Oh, you're not worthy of speaking up. You're not worthy of teaching. What do you have to say that anyone's going to listen to?" It was about 12 years ago. I started doing these workshops called Life Skills for a Stressful World on Saturday morning in my office, and then lo and behold, 10 years later, to make a long story short, I now lead a global community of self-healers. I sold my practice full-time to kind of still have a part-time practice. Just once a week I go in, but now I lead a global community of self-healers. I create online content and do interviews and do online training of healing your attachment wounds, breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma that get passed down because of relationship breakdowns that haven't properly healed. So that affects your anxiety levels, it affects your immunity, it affects your digestion, it affects the whole ecosystem of the body. Immunity is just one part of it, but it's all related. So that's what I do now, is I lead that as a global community of self-healers for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And I couldn't agree with you more. I find the same thing over the years. The more work that I've done in different areas, so much of it comes back to the process of the environment of our feelings and the environment of our thinking. And so much of that plays down in a physical way on our bodies. So now, for some people, they have a hard time grasping how that works. But we do know in many ways how that does work, even from a physical perspective. So from your perspective, how does emotional health and patterns in thinking actually affect nervous system and immunity and really like our overall physical health? What's the interplay between those things for people that aren't too aware of how that ties together and why we're focusing on this today?
That's a really good question. How the heck, how is it that our emotions and our physical well-being, in other words, aren't they separate? Don't we have like a mind and then a body? Like, how is it that an emotion like sadness and whatever, or depression for long term, can actually impact the body? That's a really great question. It happens through the mind-body connection through hormones. Basically, every thought that I have will produce a chemical. Okay, and here's the interesting play between the two. Because of the way that the nervous system is functioned, our thoughts create chemicals which then are released in our body as hormones, and they actually attach to these receptors on our body and all of a sudden create changes in our senses. So now our mind and our body are connected through the, through these little kind of ligands and proteins in our body. So the way that we think alters how we feel. And here's the crazy part about it. If I'm holding on to a feeling, okay, let's say this, I would see this constantly. Patients would come in with a spine that's, locked out of position, pinching and irritating the nerve. You understand this. You're an osteopath. You get this as well. So when there's a dysfunction in that joint, now there's pain. And guess what that pain is doing? That physical and chemical insult to the nerves in the body are going to shoot messages up to the brain and then change the way we think. So here's the effed up part of this. Your thoughts create feelings, and it actually also works the other way around. Based on your nervous system tone, which you could be in 3 different tones based on your autonomic nervous system. You could be in the top one, which is connection. All right, we have a state of connection, and our nervous system is actually functioning. It's called the ventral vagal. This is the, in the polyvagal theory, this is the connection. This is where we feel safety. We feel, everything is going well. When I'm in that space in my nervous system, guess what my thoughts are going to be like? My thoughts are going to be like, wow, I'm so grateful. If I'm in a lineup for a security and I'm in ventral vagal, I'm like, I cannot wait to go on this holiday. It's going to be so good. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to meet with so-and-so people because my social engagement system is activated. So my thoughts are going to be then in alignment with how my nervous system tone is going to be. What'll then happen is if I'm triggered in a fight or flight place, okay, my body then goes into sympathetic nervous system. It goes into a it doesn't feel safe. Because of that lack of safety that's actually in my body, my nervous system is going to start to align my thoughts to create safety. It's going to see you, if you're standing across from me, you're a threat to me. I don't feel safe. I'm now suspicious of everybody. I'm like, okay, so now because of the space that my nervous system is in, because of a sympathetic nervous system, because I'm in a trigger, what's going to happen in that moment is I'm now going to have thoughts that are in alignment with that space that my nervous system is. So now my thoughts and emotions are now exactly aligned with the state of my sympathetic nervous system. So I'm in that same lineup of the security lineup, and I'm going to be like, what do you think I'm going to be like, Jason? I'm going to be impatient. I'm going to be, hurry up. These people are getting on my nerves. Could you just get out of my freaking way right now? And then I'm going to start seeing people. I'm going to feel resentment towards them. They have become an enemy. There's a separation. There's no us, them. Now my nervous system, my thoughts, my emotions, my way of being is there in alignment with the tone of my nervous system. It's in heavy sympathetic tone. What'll then happen is if I don't get this right, okay, if I don't get this right, I then will fall into the dorsal vagal kind of shutdown. This is where you get the freeze response in the nervous system, where you don't even want to get out of bed. You freeze. You're completely freezing. You're now freezing, and you're not able to function. You don't even want to get out of bed. Your nervous system, you're functional. You could be functional, but your body is in a complete dissociation. Guess what your thoughts and emotions are going to be like in that space? Well, it's going to be I'm going to start looking in that lineup. I'm going to be like, that guy's way more fit than me. He looks like he's happy in his relationship. I'm not. I'm a failure. I'm nobody. Nothing's ever going to work out for me. And now my thoughts and feelings, my thoughts will be in alignment to my state. So my nervous system tone and state will tell me exactly what my thoughts are going. And this endless loop is all basically this kind of safety pin cycle of the mind and the body intimately being linked through the nervous system, creating chemicals, creating all sorts of challenges that are starting in the mind, are actually could be starting in the body, and the mind-body connection becomes impacted. And over time, this will start to wear down the body. The body is not meant to be in sympathetic and dorsal for prolonged periods of time. Hormones start to change. You start to feel resentment all the time. Guilt and shame start taking over. And without properly processing those old wounds, the body then breaks down, and then we look for medications, whether they be natural remedies or whatever. We're not addressing the root cause of the root cause, which is emotional wounding, your attachment wounds. It all comes back to that.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think a really neat part about that is the nervous system really dictates the lens that we see our external environment through. So the exact same environment, but depending on where you are in your nervous system, you actually feel and see three very different perspectives of what's going on. So it makes me think about when I see some patients and they have a really hard time engaging with other people, and they start to wonder what's wrong with me. Why are my relationships a problem? What's not working? Why do I keep creating the same troubles over and over again? Well, part of it is, like you said, if you're not in that social engagement part of the nervous system, then you don't have access to all of the skills that are governed by that system. And so if you're in a different system from the nervous system that doesn't allow you to access that, then that's just how you see the world and that's how you interplay in the world. But if you can get the nervous system to get dialed back into where we want to get it, then everything can start to fall back in place again. Or you have access to all of those skills that are kind of inherent of being a human being for the most part.
Yeah, basically, it's all about the social engagement system. This is, if you don't understand your nervous system, uh, well, let me rephrase that. Once you understand how the nervous system functions, and this is all of our responsibility, it's not the responsibility of a doctor. This is for all of us to understand the phases and what activities we can do to move ourselves up the ladder and become our own healers. Once you understand that, everything will start to change.
Mhm. So, big picture, when your body's experiencing some of these difficult emotions, your body's under chronic stress, that starts to have some physiological effects on the body. Starts to downregulate immune system, raises cortisol levels, starts to create a lot of different troubles, which then have all of these downstream physiological effects on our bodies. And so now that we understand that emotions play a big role in our overall health, and ultimately, I'd say probably one of the biggest roles in our feelings of fulfillment and enjoyment of life, what do we do? How do we, where are most people, what situation are most people in?
What situation are most people in? It starts with our responsibility to healing all of this becomes to actually be able to step into our bodies and realize that most of the time we have created or because of what's happened in our past, we now have this experience in our body that is, I'm not safe, the world is not safe, and I'm going to die. Okay? Based on our wounding, based on our traumas, based on experiences that we've had, we unconsciously have this experience in our body, the world is not safe and I'm going to die. Now, that is stored trauma, and that shows up as anxiety. And what that'll do is that it'll mess up our relationships. So if you're noticing similar patterns happening in your relationships, an inability to really tolerate conflict, a desperate need to external validation, noticing the same arguments happening again and again, or in your situation, it could be that you're in the same relationship, but you're having the same arguments again and again and again. This feeling of resistance to life, like, getting out of bed and just that resistance and not having an ability to regulate this really hardcore resistance that is like pressing you down in life. Not and this anxiety, like those are the conditions that are kind of pointing you in the direction that there's something for you to look at. And where do we begin? I've been asked that question so many times. It's like, where do you begin? Well, you have to first understand how you got there in the first place. And I take people through a process. And the best place to begin is what I believe is to be in the breath. Because if you just pause and you notice the way that you're breathing right now, the way that you're breathing has a one-to-one kind of inspiration, exhale, inhale, exhale relationship that is wise to have that. Inhale, exhale. But if we don't feel safe in our bodies because of past trauma with a capital T or small t trauma, what'll happen is it'll affect one of those parts of us. Most commonly, your inhale. And when I started realizing this, I was realizing that I was not inhaling properly. I would I wasn't breathing properly. So inhale is receiving in the universe. Exhale is giving. So if you have a one-to-one relationship between inhale and exhale, you have this give and receive fair exchange with the universe. That unconscious pattern, which is your breathing, will then show up in your life through love, the way that you love. If you're not inhaling, you're not feeling worthy of receiving love. If you're not exhaling properly, you feel, if you're pushing your exhale, there's a need to control. And just by observing that tells me so much. So when I learned that, I stopped trying to do all this personal development work externally and focused on going inside. And I started practicing breath work, which is now something I love teaching. I do a monthly class online on breath work, and connecting with the inner child that was abandoned as a child from myself in service of, approval, letting go of our authenticity so that we can have approval. And where do you begin? You begin there. And I take people through a process where I pretty much, from an overview perspective, from the moon looking down, show you and get you to acknowledge that the choices that you've made in your life, you think you've had agency and choice, but in fact, there's unconscious complexes, there's traumas from your past, and also more importantly, intergenerational cultural prison cages that we're born into of you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should do that. And that lack of connection with your authentic self is the thing that most of us avoid with all the psychotherapy and pills and potions. But it's the most important part, is to reconnect to the parts of you that you abandoned because you wanted approval, because it wasn't safe to fully be in your feelings, because you didn't have your feelings validated or seen. And to heal those parts. That's all of our work to do. And it all starts with the breath and learning the art of going back and rescuing the younger parts of yourself through inner child work and through body-based work and also cognitive-based work. You can't ignore the two in healing.
Yeah, and there's so much of it too. And this last while has been a lot of the body-based work, I think, like look at the work like Peter Levine and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and some of these guys. It's a lot of the older sort of just straight cognitive therapy around stuff is very different. It's trying to get people back into their body again and feeling the body again, because that's where a lot of the healing really happens, is being able to, that felt sense, which can be tricky because a lot of times we don't like that felt sense, right? I mean, a lot of times I think we're running away and trying to do everything we can to distract ourselves from that sensation, or just turning it into something more and more and more, and sort of lighting the fire up on it. I remember one of my teachers I had done some work with before, Pema Chodron, she would talk about the need to stay with body sensation without adding anything to it. She said, treat emotions like an ember. It's like if you don't do anything other than just sit with them and notice them, they allow themselves to burn out naturally,
Yeah.
right? But we don't do that. We throw kindling on it and
We
straw
throw
and
story.
firewood, and
Yeah.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
in the thinking of it.
Sensation without explanation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I call it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it, because what she explained was that if you can stay with the sensation without doing anything else to it, you naturally fall into a place of awareness, openness, and warmth. It's like those are the pool that we're all a part of, but we kind of get disconnected from it because we're kind of trapped in the fight, right? So you had mentioned the overview method. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about the overview method and how you came to that, and a bit of what that process is around, because it sounds like a really great way to help people. Because the reality is a lot of people feel stuck and they don't really know where to begin. And to even start with trying to feel, I think breath, I'm always constantly humbled by how powerful the breath is. And just as a starting point, like you said, just start paying attention to the breath. Just that alone sometimes naturally arises insights and awarenesses. But tell me a little bit more about the overview method and how that plays into everything.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when astronauts would leave the planet and they would come back down to Earth, have you heard of those experiences? Have you kind of read about them? Like, tell me what you have gathered about that.
Well, from what I've heard with some of them is just a bit of an aha type of a moment when they've seen the totality of something that they have been intimately a part of, but not being able to see the whole. But when they
Exactly.
come back, their perspective completely changes because they see the big picture as opposed to the little piece that they're aware of.
There's a word for that. It's called the overview effect, what you just described, right? So what do I have in my home? What do you see there? Can you see that?
You got a planet.
Yes, that's the Earth from the moon. So I have the picture in my apartment. This is how committed I am to this perspective of Earthrise photo. This is the first picture of the Earth ever taken. It was the moment the collective consciousness of the planet was able to see that there is no us versus them, there's just us. And the astronauts would come down and they had a profound epiphany. And so this is exactly what people feel after they complete a workshop, the overview experience. It's what it is a methodology, and it's turned into an active meditation. What it is an active meditation where your thoughts and attention are brought away from the drama of the challenges of your life. And you, as you pull away and pull away and pull away, like you're doing here, you take the perspective of the moon and we ask you a series of questions about the situation. We first understand the nervous system. You get the foundations of human behavior and the nervous system. And once you understand how human behavior and the nervous system actually works on the planet, you now look at your entire story under that lens. The overview method is a lens of which to view your life from the perspective, not of the victim, but as a part of the dance of victim, perpetrator, rescuer. And once you're able to see your part in all of them, your perspective of your challenge completely changes. You're able to put this lens on your mother, on your father, on your abuser, on your ex-heart partner, and you're able to just go, fuck. It's not my fault, because I was unconsciously in this cage of cultural imprisonment and matrix of my past wounding, but now I'm going to claim personal authority and to expand that space between stimulus and response, because your nervous system lets you know where those old cages are, your previous woundings. Anytime you have a reactivity, there's a wound. You now see your perspective. You now start, the overview method is the process by you take a triggered reaction, and you use a process of going inside and rescuing the younger part of you that this wounding is really all about. And by reparenting that and changing the perspective, you now gain access to your inner voice, which will help lead you into the unknown rather than looking for externals. Because the whole point is to break free from the, what should I do? What should mommy and daddy, what are mommy and daddy telling me I should do? What does culture tell me I should do? In service of, what do I really want? We don't have access to that. So the overview method is an access to your inner voice and healing
Nice.
your attachment wounds through an active meditation and self-inquiry that includes the cognitive and the somatic together.
Yeah.
So I've developed that over the last 10 years, and I teach it to people online, and it's powerful. I had a really neat experience just today in my group with a woman who had been healing, like having this issue with anxiety, breakdown of relationships. She was a victim to domestic violence, going through a bitter divorce, spending tons of money on that, jumped in and started working with us. And one of the side things of her anxiety was skin picking. She was just constantly picking at her skin. And today, after 90 days, she showed us a before and after of her face. I don't know if you can actually see, but it's pretty powerful. I'm going to show you right now. If you can see, here it is. I'm not sure how well
Oh
you can
yeah,
see, but
yeah.
that picture on the left is her before she began, and on the right, and with wearing no makeup and no filter, it's just based on healing her past traumas, based on reconnecting and reparenting her younger parts, taking responsibility, having uncomfortable conversation, healing those relationships. all of a sudden she didn't have the compulsion to pull at her skin anymore. People don't get sick as often because their immune systems start to work with a regulated nervous system. If you're in sympathetic fight or flight and you're not feeling safe already in your body, well, guess what? The immune system doesn't work very well, which is really shitty in the whole COVID time, because fear is just constantly, be afraid of this virus, be afraid, be afraid. Oh, and then get vaccinated, rather than going, listen, let's pay attention to this, to what's going on inside of us, because your body can handle viruses quite well. I just breathed in 1 billion of them right now. And,
Mhm.
I have been for the last few months, and I've been totally fine.
Mhm. No, I think that's really great. And I like the idea that too, when you have this overview, when you back up and see things from a little bit of a distance and you see the bigger picture, when you're not right in the muck of it, then you're not being triggered in the same way where you can actually maybe see the broader picture, as opposed to where you really can't when you're constantly being triggered all the time.
Mm.
You had mentioned trauma. So I'm wondering what your sort of description of trauma is. And we talked a couple times, or you've mentioned around storing trauma. And this is something that I think too. I think of a lot of times trauma and emotional buildup. I think of it a lot of times like one of those old brewing cauldrons where it's just bubbling up and spilling out all over the place. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, these things just do get stored in the body. And I know, mentioned before, Candace Pert's work in Molecules of Emotion, she talks about these
Yep.
ligands and these peptides that literally get stored in the body. She would call the body would be like the subconscious mind, because it has all of this neurochemistry just sitting there that hasn't been metabolized. How do you describe trauma? And from your perspective, when you talk about it being stored in the body, how are you kind of seeing that?
The body keeps the score. And let me give you an example. You can go to therapy for 20 years to talk about your father. However, if I were to be around you, or your abusive father, for example, and if I were to be around you, Jason, and then my voice raises and I go, Jason, what the hell?
Mhm.
Guess what? Guess what's going to happen within your body? You're going to freeze up. Exactly. You're literally going to freeze up. In other words, your body doesn't feel safe. Your body is a reaction. Your body is reacting. And most of the trauma that we have had is before we even had language, before we were even verbal. From age 0, when you're in utero, to the age of 8, you don't have a conscious mind. It's all unconscious. And you're downloading all this freaking crap into yourself, all of the fears, all of the anxiety, everything going on. Like right now, kids going through the whole COVID thing, for example, they're watching mom and dad. They're watching mom and dad try to uh, resolve what's going on, and they're paying attention to how mom and dad's energy is. And so that fear of, oh my gosh, I'm not safe, gets stored in the body and we don't even know it. And so the only way we know it's there is when we get triggered. That's it. That's the only way we know that it's there. It's when we get triggered.
So that answers part of what I wanted to ask was, how do people know when there is something that they need to work with,
Yeah.
something that they need to kind of
Your
address?
nervous system will let you know. Whenever there's a reactivity, there's a wound.
Mhm.
Whenever there's a reactivity, there's a wound. And what happens is when the reaction comes, it's wise to just pause. And if you have the foresight, it takes some practice to get there, to be able to go inside and go, what's the story I'm really making right now? And it usually comes back to, I'm not safe. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. All of those things. It
Mhm.
comes to that. It usually just goes to that, right?
Yep. Yeah, you filter it down
And
enough, and those are the big ones that pop up.
those are the big ones. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. And so
Not
that's
loved.
self-abandonment. So what happens is we've preconditioned self-abandonment again and again and again and again and again. That's basically what it is. It's letting you know. Your reactions are letting you know. And our responsibility is to find out, how old do I feel when that came up? And then you'll reveal a younger part of you that needs some attention. And then that's where I created the process of kind of reconnecting with that and then healing yourself, becoming the hero to that part of you.
And how does one know when they think they're doing the work, but they're actually emotionally bypassing? Same as sometimes I find this the same concept around spiritually bypassing. I think we're
Yeah,
living a certain way, but we're actually shuffling things around so that we're not actually doing the work.
feeling, yeah. Um, most counseling, most psychology is bypassing. Most personal development is a form of bypass, because in order to truly process it, you actually need to stop it and feel it. Most of the things we do is to avoid feeling certain things. So you got to actually pause and to feel it. So that's the most difficult part. And most counselors, most psychologists who have a degree doesn't necessarily mean they've actually done their healing work. You can tell when somebody's actually done their healing work is they're actually in their body. They're not talking from here, they're talking from here. And that's the net result of it. You get to feel that the mask is taken off. They're very authentic. They're not putting on a mask trying to be professional. They're actually real people. That's another way you can tell. Most of it is what I discovered. I was spending my first half of my personal development world life is bypassing instead of stopping and feeling it. Most of it is bypass. It's not often I see methodologies that are truly healing. How do you know is you actually, if the process actually involves staying connected, like if the process actually involves healing, involves feeling those emotions that you're trying to run away from. So it's super duper important that with Carl Jung, it's shadow work. It's
Yeah.
basically experiencing those emotions and really going in and uncovering it.
Yeah. And like you had talked about with some of Stephen Porges's work earlier with the dorsal vagal work that you were talking about earlier. What I think is so fascinating is how that, well, exactly what you're just talking about is so completely connected to how that system works. It's like when people get stuck in that fight or flight mode for a long time, or if I'm stuck in fight or flight mode, a lot of times it's because I haven't had a chance to actually feel the sensations and the emotions that I kind of got stuck with. They never got a chance to run their course, right? So then you get kind of stuck, and then that's part of why we get this triggering over and over and over again. And if we allow the process of just staying and feeling and letting the emotions run their course, then we start to experiencing something different. The nervous system starts to regulate again, and then we have access to all those other pieces. Does that sound kind of similar to what you're talking about?
Yeah, once you allow yourself those feelings, all of a sudden, revelations, you now connect with that inner guidance that you've disconnected from because you avoided the feeling. It really comes down to becoming your own hero, of accessing the guru that's within you rather than looking outside. My mentor John DeMartini said, when the voice and the vision on the inside becomes louder and more profound than opinions on the outside, you've begun to master your own life. We don't have access to that inner voice if we're avoiding our own feelings from it.
Mhm.
And everybody who reaches out to me, they say the same thing. They'll say, I don't know who I am anymore. They've been abandoning themselves since childhood and further, and then relationships aren't working. As I've been so busy pleasing others that I don't even know who I am anymore.
Yeah, I hear that all the time too. And I actually had a conversation with my stepmother one time and asking her kind of around what really gets you excited, like what really kind of, what would you really want to be able to do, and she had a very difficult time being able to separate that from what would ultimately make my dad happy, right?
Right. What
and
should I be doing?
and not that there wasn't an aspect of like truth to that, but it was sort of like it's nice to be able to connect both of them. What kind of works really well for both of us together and brings me happy because I see him happy, but also outside of all of that, what's just my heart being drawn to? What am I really feeling my own, passions and desires about? And sometimes that stuff gets, I think, so put on the back burner that we just completely lost connection to it.
Totally, 100%. We are a race of disconnected people, disconnected souls, and healing is a spiritual path. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this as a somebody who had a background in science and is in the healing profession. I mean, we're better off teaching people, as far as doctors go, how to access true unconditional love and gratitude for ourselves, for our parents, the way they were, for the challenges that we've gone through, to learn tools of regulating the nervous system, to be able to to have communication strategies that teach us how to heal conflict rather than have conflict, what we modeled after, which is conflict happens and there's no repair. How do you repair after conflict is the most important thing, not to avoid it. How are you repairing from the conflict? Because the unrepaired conflict carries with us as woundings, and then it causes us to avoid conflicts later on because, I'm not going to speak my truth because then there's going to be conflict, because when I was a kid, conflict happened and people weren't speaking for weeks. So I'm just going to keep hiding myself in service of this, elusive utopia that I'm creating, and just creating an internal conflict in doing that. So how do we find out who we are? How do we create safety in our bodies? How do we speak up for ourselves? How do we hold space for others? How do we heal for conflict when there's a misattunement or a breakdown in communication? How do we repair? These are the skills that will create health in our bodies. Because there's a neurology that happens interpersonally between you and I. The way that I feel about you, you're going to be able to tell. You can feel it. You can feel it coming from me. You can feel if I'm pissed off at you. So can children. Children can sense the energy between mom and dad. They can feel, they're like, it's not safe here. So then they'll create an illness to get the two of those warring parents to finally work as a team so that they can feel safe. Like, that's how brilliant our nervous systems are. We will do whatever it is to become whatever for safety. And it's all for our own protection. And even though it's an adaptation that's not going to be healthy, if we're going to do it, if it means getting love, we will break ourselves down if it means getting love. So I was just fascinated by that. And I just really loved teaching the process of healing. And what makes my heart sing is healing families, because that's essentially what happens. Essentially what I realize is, holy shit, like, I'm teaching these people how to heal their relationships with their parents. And I'm teaching them how to restore integrity whenever there's a breakdown of a relationship, because their health depends on it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I would say probably the most difficult things that create most people stress as well is their immediate relationships and their family dynamic. And if anything's going to
100%.
push your buttons,
100%.
I think Mother Teresa actually said, start with your family first.
Totally.
I was going to say, I think such an important part around the work that you're talking about, and because a lot of times I'm thinking, when you're struggling with stuff, you're just looking for how do you fix situations. But the reality is that the fixes almost naturally start to happen when that attunement is dialed in first. So I think about this as sort of this inner versus outer world. It's like, from a physical perspective, we're trying to change this and change that and move all these things around and limit certain people in our lives and avoid all these different things. And you can try and do that to a point, but what's really going to build resilience is how we improve that inner world, right? That's what's really going to improve. Then we're not walking around in a bubble all the time.
Nothing else will suffice, Jason. Nothing else will ever suffice. We are looking for heroes outside of us. We are looking for this magical savior to come and rescue. One of the things that pisses a lot of people off when I tell them is, no one's here to rescue you. You are here to create safety within your own body first, and then it starts to trickle out into family, and then it starts to trickle out into community, into your business, your practice, your whatever. But it starts with me saying, all right, I get it. It's not my fault, but I'm going to take responsibility for claiming my personal authority first in creating health, from creating safety in that little child inside of me that doesn't feel safe, and then outwardly working from there. And in the last 2 years of me doing this, my entire world has changed. I went from a toxic relationship breakdown was very volatile. After the breakup, we were in business together too. After the breakup, I basically said, oh crap, I know what this is about. I know what I have to do. I put my place up on Airbnb, and at the age of 43, I moved in with my parents. I said, I know that everything, why I've gone through one divorce, and this after 4 years was like a marriage. We kind of like a divorce. It was a big wake up call. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to play victim anymore. I'm going to now say, all right, where is this coming from? It comes from my dysfunctional relationship with my parents. I moved back in with them. It's kind of like being, in the Iraq, the Gulf War. You're a veteran in the Gulf War, and it's giving you PTSD. You come to America to kind of rest, and then after 2 weeks, you're sent back there. So I literally went to the environment that freaking triggers me the most, and I literally sat there in the discomforting soup of all of my triggers of the shit that my mom and dad kept bringing up. I never felt seen. They're narcissistic parents, never had empathy. Nothing I did was ever enough. I have a twin brother who's a success, who stayed in the religion, and he did all the things, and he's a dentist. He didn't leave his career, and having them basically yelling and screaming, we told you so, and having to sit there and find a way to love myself through all that and love them through all that birthed this idea called trigger proof. Trigger proof doesn't mean triggerless. It means taking responsibility for your triggers. So that was the powerful distinction for myself.
I love it. Well, and probably one of the biggest opportunities for total self-growth if you can work with it, right?
100%. And now everything has changed. I now have, I met the woman of my dreams. We have a baby on the way. We got married in April, COVID time, baby due in October. At the time of this recording, yeah, I'm doing what I love, where I love, with whom I love. And all happened because I could create a life of my design, starting with safety in my body, and then my whole world externally started reflecting what was going on inside. And
Mhm.
it's work in progress. We still get on each other's nerves sometimes, and it's like, how do we deal with the conflict? And we're really good at, like the other day after an argument, we repaired from. I was like, I'm really proud of us. We give each other a high five, like we're in this game together to
Mhm.
create safety and a space for healing, which is what relationships could possibly be. Imagine relationships being a source of nourishment rather than depletion, and that's where we
Yeah.
got to begin if we really want to have health in our lives.
Well, and that's so important too, because it's like you said, it's not to be trigger less, it's to be trigger proof. And it's sort of this false sense of what I think this movie version of relationships. And it's like relationships aren't supposed to not have their rough edges on them.
Yeah,
I remember one person saying it's all the rough edges that eventually polish it into a pearl. It's like that's where all of the stuff that we get to work on. And I mean, you can't have two people in close proximity for very long without some kind of rub happening. But that's the thing, is it's not that you're not going to be triggered. It's not that you're not going to have, I mean, that was like the Buddha talked about. That's the first suffering. Stuff always happens. The second suffering is how we decide to the arrow we shoot ourselves with. How do we interpret the story? How do we keep ruminating on things and create more that needs to be there? I had such a similar experience with that too, after a really bad breakup when I was in my sort of late 30s. Same thing, finished everything, moved in, was back not with my parents that time, but with a friend, sleeping in the spare room for a while. Everything was all chaos. And then it was like, but it was probably the biggest turning point for things. And really shortly after that was then boom, finally, got, I think, my relationship stuff figured out, at least to the point where then I invited someone in that really nourishes me, right? And that I can nourish her, and then we can kind of see each other. And that sort of just opened up. But that never would have happened if I wasn't in a place where I was ready to actually allow that back into my life.
beautiful,
So
beautiful.
one thing I wanted to get your perspective on is, a lot of times at the heart, at least from what I see in practice too, a lot of people always dealing with this underlying anxiety. And a lot of what's even underlying the anxiety is this chronic guilt and shame that's always there, ruminating and coming up. How do you work with things like that, which sometimes are harder ones for people to be able to stay with it. I remember once saying guilt is what you share with other people, shame's what you keep to yourself. How do you work with some of that stuff when these are
Yeah,
challenging ones for people
it's a
and
good one.
often need to be worked with at some point?
Well, here's the thing is number one, definitely you got to have a guide because that's a tough one. Judgment, abandonment, blame, and shame of self is what everybody really suffers from. It's like it's universal, and shame thrives in the dark. So you must have a community.
Mhm.
Imagine a group of people sharing what they're ashamed of the most together in a safe place where they don't actually have to feel alone, and they can go, oh my God, me too. I have
Mhm.
it too. So that is when you use co-regulation, because shame and guilt are a bitch. It's not easy to let go of, but the most effective way of healing that is in community. Like, let me give you an example. So we had this guy I believe that anxiety is just prolonged, is just unresolved shame and guilt. I've seen it so much. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is unresolved shame and guilt. It's not anxiety. So you try to heal your anxiety symptoms by not dealing with that. But just to share openly and vulnerably, this one guy, he was 7 years old and had a, touching type of relationship with his little sister. And he's been holding on to that for 30 years. And in front of everybody in a group call, he shared it. He said, I've been holding on to this shame. My sister and I, we, touched each other and several times. And so he literally shared that. He goes, I want to unburden myself. And we all literally held space for him, and we sent him love. And I was like, who else here who else was touched or inspired by that? And that really brought up something for them. And there was like 5 or 6 other people who put up their hand. So to answer your question, how do you deal with that? There's no therapy that's better than what just happened there. Like, you can't talk your way out of feelings. You must feel them fully and expose them and move through. And there were tears, there was sharing. So to answer your question, it's best done in community.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. And you got to be good at you got to get good at grieving. You got to get good at it's not about feeling better. You got to get better at feeling it. You got to get better at feeling shame. You got to get better at feeling guilt. Your avoidance of it prolongs it. So it's learning how to move and dance in it. Ooh. And so we actually do exercises where we embody those feelings, and we feel them, and we express them, and we scream them, and we cry them. And so feeling them fully is a part of dealing with it. And so it's best done with a mentor, with a guide, and with a community.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it reminds me a lot of when we would talk about, doing things that scare you so that you build some muscle around what it feels like to be in a situation where you feel a little bit scared, so that you've got more resilience around that. You've got more your comfort zone around that
Exposure. Yeah.
changes. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
you feel these different things, the more that you can work with them better and better and better.
And doing things like, I get my clients to do cold showers for that
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah, exactly. Something that's uncomfortable that you say. I mean, that was the whole premise of meditation,
And you
right back at
breathe.
the
Yeah.
beginning. You sit in something that kind of physically can feel uncomfortable, so that you build some muscle around being able to sit with emotional discomfort when it
That's
arises.
becoming trigger proof. Essentially, that's becoming trigger
Yeah,
proof. The body is the best access point for it.
yeah.
You must get into the body and the sensation of it.
Over your years of experience, all of the situations that you've been through, your past experiences, what were some of the top game-changing insights or awarenesses that you experienced or learned firsthand that really changed the direction of your life and influenced you?
The biggest thing was, I was doing everything backwards. I was trying to change my thoughts and beliefs without focusing on my physical state. And when I realized that your thoughts are actually a result of your state, not just not the other way around, everything changed. I stopped trying to do cognitive work. I stopped trying to do, all of the seminars that didn't involve an active kind of like getting into my body, and everything started to shift for me.
Mhm.
That was it.
Wonderful.
Is to start with the body first.
And it's a great piece of advice, I think, for particularly where we are now, when we live in a world where there is so many potential distractions to step away from our body when stuff does arise. I mean, we can quite easily check internet or watch Netflix or text or do something to just step away from that sensation. I remember Pema Chodron talking about it once. She said it's like this inner restlessness that we're always trying to stay just one step ahead of, right? And we're just always trying to move, so it doesn't quite get us because we're so uncomfortable with what the sensation might be like. Spend some time in your body and just see
Yeah.
what starts to change.
Learn how to get good at feeling uncomfortable and stop running away from feelings is really it.
Dr. Nima, where can people learn more about your work? I know you do some probably not right at the moment, but you're going to be doing more live presentations. And I know you've got an online program for the overview method too. I wonder if you can tell us where we can send people to get more of that information, learn more about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, right there. I just dropped you over there. Just grab all those links. That is a link to a free workshop that I have on becoming trigger proof. I gave you the promo code, so anybody who's listening can get it for free. I'm giving it to you free of charge if you're listening, and it basically goes over the steps of becoming trigger proof. The other thing I wanted to invite you into is my Facebook group. It is Trigger Proof. The Facebook group is called Trigger Proof. How to regulate stress and strengthen immunity during a global crisis. And so I'm going to leave the link for that as well. And just watch content that I have pretty much almost every day about the same thing. And there's the link for it right there. But the best place is to come to one of our breathwork and badassery seminars, or the overview experience, which is a 5-hour Zoom retreat, or 3-hour if you're in the breathwork and meditation. It's a deep dive into healing your attachment wounds. That's the best place to begin if you're really just keen on jumping into the work. And so I have those little resources there for you, and would love to. Let me just give you the link for all of that stuff, and
Yeah, I'll
boom.
put everything in the show notes so that people have access to all of that. So when your episode is on, people can go to the inspirehealthpodcast.com website and click on your picture and the show notes, and then they'll be able to have a link to all of that stuff.
Beautiful. That's all there, and happy to serve in any way I can.
Wonderful. Dr. Nima, thank you so much for your time and expertise. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Jason. All
You're
right, take
welcome.
care. Bye-bye.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.